Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. The Premier League presented a Christmas cracker over the weekend, from Morgan Rogers' magic to Spurs' red cards, and perhaps the worst Premier League team ever. Well, let's dissect it and get into it. All right, in with us today, we've got Adam Crafton. We've also got Jack Pitt-Brooke as well. So let's start with a bit of the festive spirit. And what better way to do it than actually some heartwarming football stories. We'll get into the bad ones a little later, but let's start with the good, in fact. And two stunning strikes from Aston Villa's Morgan Rogers. His brace earned Aston Villa a 2-1 win over Manchester United, making it 10 wins in a row for Unai Emery's side. Rogers is now on 7 goals for the season, Adam. What did you make of his performance?
He was amazing. But he was like Villa's only kind of good player on the day. Like Villa were a really strange performance yesterday in that, they've just won 10 in a row and they're on this amazing run and they're playing against a very depleted Manchester United. And you kind of came away sort of almost less convinced by Villa in some ways, but incredibly convinced by this one individual who scored 2 fantastic goals. And, it was interesting if you kind of just think it more from an England perspective. Thomas Tuchel has been putting a lot of faith in Morgan Rogers over sort of recent months. And it's probably something that Jack is better placed to speak to than me. But I think maybe people thought, he was just making a point to some of the other England players, like the Foden, Palmer, Bellingham, about this is, some of the work rate maybe that he wants from that position, some of the attributes he wants from that position. But now you start to watch Morgan Rogers and think it's quite hard not to play him for England. Yesterday proved that once again.
I think he was arguably one of the best players over the course of those 3 international breaks they had in the autumn. In that, the 5-0 win they had in Serbia in September, which was really the best game of the Thomas Tuchel era so far, Rogers played in the number 10 role in Bellingham's position, and I thought he was brilliant that day, and he did everything that Tuchel would want him to do. And so I think when it comes to that debate about the number 10 role for England, everybody has opinions about Bellingham and Foden and Cole Palmer, and understandably so, and Eberechi Eze. But, Rogers is kind of the man in possession. Like, Bellingham did start the last game, but Rogers has started more games than anyone else there in the last few months. And I think he's also shown for Aston Villa week in, week out why he has to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, can I put you on the spot then? Out of Rogers, Foden, Bellingham, Eze and Palmer, you can only take 2 to the World Cup, Jack. Who are you going for?
Well, do you mean take 2 as a number 10? Because you can always cheat a bit and say, well, I'll take Eze as a left winger.
I knew you'd come up with some smart answer. You know what I mean? Go on.
I'd take Foden as a false 9 and then maybe take Bellingham as a number 6. And then all of a sudden you manage you can find a way to only take 2 number 10s. It's simple.
It is Christmas, so you can have a special gift. What would you say, Adam?
Probably Palmer and Rogers.
Oh, no Bellingham?
I think, no.
Because for me, Palmer is the one that I wouldn't take if I was only out of those 5. Simply
you wouldn't take Cole Palmer?
Well, like under the auspices of this kind of hypothetical situation you set up, okay. But in the sense that Palmer's not played for England for ages. Like Palmer's not been involved in any of the squads recently. He hasn't been involved. I think he came on as a sub in the June window, but we've not really seen him that well integrated into Thomas Tuchel's team. And that's not his fault. He just keeps being injured during the course of international breaks. But I think that if I was going to, personally, I would like to find a way to just shoehorn him into the squad because he's such a match winner. But if I had to not take one of those guys, it would probably be him, just because I wouldn't know how he fits with the team in quite the same way.
Adam, he's a player that's kind of come out of nowhere. Villa signed him from the Championship at Middlesbrough at the beginning of 2024. 24 goals and 22 assists in 93 games for Villa. I guess the question always is, can a Championship player do it in the Premier League? He seems to be doing it, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's worth having a bit of, calm around it. He's still only scored in 4 games this season. It feels like after he scored those 2 goals yesterday, in my head I was like, oh my God, he's having a Gareth Bale season, just because you sort of just keep seeing these not just goals, but but absolute worldies. I'm trying to think of like the season where Bale was at Spurs and just sort of ended up scoring 20, 25 goals and was unbelievable, and goes to Real Madrid. But he's clearly very special, and he's had an interesting career trajectory. If you think about the different clubs he's been at the Championship with Middlesbrough, but he was also at Man City for a period of time. It's incredible to think, the players that have kind of gone through Man City's youth system. Just out of those that we just mentioned, Foden, Palmer, Rodgers, Liam Delap, who's obviously at Chelsea now as well. And I think Rodgers gets quite a lot of freedom within this Emery team because it's a very kind of workmanlike team, and he works very hard as well. And there isn't that much room for flair players, really. Most of the players in there are kind of doing a job. But Rodgers is kind of the special one that is afforded a bit more leeway. Equally, it might help if the opponents recognise that he wants to cut in from the left and shoot.
Just loves it, doesn't he? Yeah.
which he seemed to surprise Man United yesterday. So it'll be interesting to see like how he deals with, he's now getting this status of being basically Villa's best player, and Villa are currently the third best team in the league. So, he's going to get more attention, and he's going to have to find ways around that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Manchester United. Just a quick word. Bruno Fernandes, obviously, will be missing for a while. We don't know how long, but Matheus Cunha scored yesterday. Do you think he's the one to step up into that position? And could also Manchester United finally see what life looks like without Bruno Fernandes, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it's not been good when they've had to play without him previously. Quite often over the last few years, you've had these periods where people would say when Fernandes was playing and maybe going through more difficult periods, United should try playing without Fernandes because they'll keep the ball better. Then he'll miss a game or two and they'll just lose. That's generally been, I appreciate they lose quite a lot when he plays as well, but when he doesn't play, the record is worse. It's hard to say that Cunha's the replacement now because Fernandes has been playing in this deeper position. So the replacement really is Kobbie Mainoo, but we're waiting to see whether Kobbie Mainoo is going to be fit because he missed the game kind of unexpectedly yesterday. So if not, you then get into like, is it Casemiro and Ugarte? Lisandro Martinez played as a midfielder yesterday. They've got all these players who have now gone to AFCON as well. The good news is, on paper, the fixtures really aren't that bad over Christmas. You've got Newcastle at home and then Leeds, Wolves and Burnley. Like, I know they don't win that many games, United, but really they've got to be getting 9-10 points out of that, you would think, or at least 8. So I think that's the good thing, but it's a blow because, invariably Fernandes is the player that makes things happen for them.
I mean, Jack, Adam doesn't seem convinced, but Villa still in touching distance of Arsenal, I think just 3 points behind them. Should we start taking them seriously as title contenders?
I'd be surprised. I think they've certainly made lots of predictions from the start of the season look a bit silly because of how well they've done. I think at the start of the season when they started so slowly, people thought that maybe this whole project has run out of steam, and they've confounded all of that. I'm not expecting them to be right up there with Manchester City and Arsenal at the very end of the season. Just because, like the second half of the season is really going to test out their depth. I'm expecting them to go all the way in the Europa League. I mean, I think they're probably the best team in the Europa League, so there's no reason they shouldn't be able to get through to that final. And I just think that City and Arsenal's experience in these situations and their quality and depth will probably tell. But I mean, there's no reason they can't get back. I mean, regardless of what happens in the Europa League, there's no reason they can't get back into next season's Champions League via the Premier League. Like, they're easily good enough to be top 5, and they're showing that every week at the moment.
Yeah, not Premier League potentially, Adam, but Europa League feels very in their reach, especially with Unai Emery's record in that competition.
Yeah, I guess they may just at a certain point have a bit of a choice to make about, we saw with Tottenham and Manchester United last season that going deep in the Europa League becomes a bit of a choice at times if you've got a small squad between, do we try and win this trophy and give everything to that, or do we concentrate on Premier League position? And, we've seen Villa a couple of times just kind of fall away a bit in the Premier League. And I do think it's more important for them this season. So, I know obviously you get into the Champions League if you win the Europa League, but it's more of a lottery if you're relying on winning a final. I think it would be really good for Villa as a club this season to finish third or fourth more than it would be to win the Europa League, personally. Having missed out on the Champions League this season, again, very narrowly. The challenge with that is Emery loves the Europa League. So I can't see him making that judgment at any point whatsoever. But they do have a pretty lean squad beyond the kind of first 14, 15, and particularly in the attacking positions. They don't score many goals. I think they've only scored 15 home goals this season in the Premier League. That's not a lot to be scoring by Christmas. But I was watching the game yesterday. It was like, I thought certainly first half, kind of Man United were as good, if not better than Villa. In fact, definitely first half. And second half, pretty even as well. But at the moment, it seems like Villa just find a way to win in a way that Man United just find a way not to win. And that's a really good habit for Villa to have. But then you get into kind of, are they outdoing the underlying data? Does that matter? Who knows? Let's see. They've got Chelsea and Arsenal over the next week or so. So that will, I think again tell us by Christmas. I would expect by March that City and Arsenal will have pulled away from them, and maybe even Liverpool catch them up. For me, it's like the fourth and fifth positions are the ones that Villa should see as kind of their goal.
I'd be really curious to hear what Villa fans think their priority should be, because obviously so far under Emery they've come close-ish to trophies but always, as Adam says, they've struggled with the fact that if you have that many, if you're competing multiple fronts and you've got tons of games over the course of the season, it's really, really hard to keep all the plates spinning at the same time. Like in Emery's first full season, they got to the semis of the Conference League. Last season, they got to the FA Cup semi, Champions League quarter-final, and then they finished sixth. And so this year, it might be, they might be in a good position in the league and in the cups coming through until March, April. And that's when you suddenly, it can all collapse in on you, or maybe you have to start allocating resources. And I just wonder what the fan base will want the manager to do under those circumstances, because it's a really difficult situation for a club to be in if you don't have Manchester City-sized resources.
Yeah, but then I look at it, and I only say this because I'm from the West Midlands, and I've got a lot of mates who are Villa fans. Villa's last trophy was in 1996, the League Cup, which was called the Coca-Cola Cup. I mean, that's a long time to wait. You try saying, okay, you're not going to get a European trophy this season, you just get top four. I mean, that's so hard to stomach, gents.
Yeah, and that's why I think it makes sense to go all out for that trophy, because the fans will remember that more than they'll remember coming fifth.
Yeah, I mean, as if it's not fixed everything at Tottenham. Winning a trophy
no, but they didn't
season.
Yeah, but the point isn't whether or not it fixes anything. The point is that it was a fun experience, and it's the fun experience you can't replicate with anything else.
Sure, but I would say there's fun experiences in the fact that they beat. Last time in the Champions League, they beat Bayern Munich, and they had PSG to play in a knockout game that they nearly won. I think there can be fun experiences when you are a team. I would have a different answer. I don't
think that winning a league phase game in the Champions League, even against a good team, is remotely comparable to the experience of winning a trophy.
I think that's probably true, but I'm saying I still think it is for a team that's not really had that many experiences in the Champions League. I don't think that experience should be kind of downplayed either, like the buzz that fans will get from being in that competition. At the same time, I think the other reason why Champions League qualification from a kind of more boring perspective for Villa is important is they've been kind of really squeezed by PSR the last year or so. And also, if you look at the makeup of their squad, you look at some of the key positions, you think of players like Emi Martinez, who's obviously getting older. Everyone's getting older, but particularly Emi Martinez, Ollie Watkins, John McGinn. some of those like key positions in a team that they're going to have to replenish at a certain point. And I just think financially it would really be good timing for Villa to do that. And they could, by the way, they could do both. It's not impossible for Emery to do both. And I also know, Villa fans were devastated when they, lost the FA Cup semi-final against Palace last year as well in the way that they did. So I'm not downplaying at all. I just think that financial imperative combined with the buzz of being in the Champions League and reaching the quarterfinals, it was more than just like winning the odd game, is also a really good thing. It's kind of spoiled for choice.
Yeah, Villa fans, let us know in the comments, Champions League qualification or winning the Europa League. Right, let's move on because another defeat for Wolves this weekend. A 2-0 defeat at home to Brentford on Saturday. That's now 17 games, 0 wins, 2 draws, 15 defeats. 2 points is the joint lowest tally in the first 17 games of a season in the history of England's top 4 divisions. The next 2 matches, gents, away to Liverpool and Manchester United. Adam, can we see Wolves actually winning any matches this season?
Well, they might be among the more winnable games this season.
What, Manchester United and Liverpool?
Yeah, but Wolves are like an interesting story in that, I think for a while, they would sell and that they would sell high and then they would always find, or George Mendes would always seem to find them, new cheaper talent that they would then play and then they would sell on. But, you get to a point, and we saw this with, teams like Southampton previously, where you can't keep selling your best players and presuming that your recruitment team or your super agent will unearth, a diamond that is as good. So if you sell Cunha and Neto and Ait Nouri, you're going to get to a point where Raul Jimenez, where that comes unstuck, and we're seeing that again. And they've not really reinvested in an effective way in the last couple of years, and it's sad, but it must be incredibly depressing at the moment as a Wolves fan, particularly those home games. I mean, it looked pretty toxic in the game against Manchester United a couple of weeks ago. You had sort of fans protesting before the game, then some leaving before the end of the game. So it's pretty rough. Last season, they kind of got away with it with, Pereira coming in and kind of putting off a bit of a miracle. This time, you could have any manager in and they wouldn't be doing anything. It's very strange to me that Rob Edwards actually left what was looking quite a good job and possible promotion at Middlesbrough to basically just go and get relegated at Wolves. But that's clearly what he's decided to do.
We've just found out that Wolves have a new interim chairman, Nathan Shee, who took over from Jeff Shee, actually no relation, in fact. Is this a little too late, changing in the upper echelons of the club?
Yeah, I mean, I think that their decline has been coming for quite a few years now, really. As Adam says, the constant flow of selling good players and replacing them with ordinary players, it does catch up with you after a while. And, they managed to save themselves last year by going out and getting a top manager. And then when even a top manager can't get anything out of these players because the players aren't good enough, then you don't really have any more levers to pull. Like I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly how this change of chairman is going to help them. But I guess the big question really is, well, what is the ownership's appetite for spending money and getting them out of this? And secondly, are they in the right place to come back up? Because I suppose, like, if you were being really, really generous to Wolves, you'd say, well, Rob Edwards has got a great record in the Championship and now they've got exactly the right man to help get them promoted next season, which is a very rosy way of looking at it. But will this squad stand out in the Championship? I'm not sure. The Championship is pretty competitive now. And so I think it's kind of unclear really what their strategy is, or even if there is a strategy at kind of board and ownership level to get Wolves, out. It's because it's going to get worse before it gets better. But do they have a route to kind of come back and be competitive in sort of 2, 3, 4 years' time?
This could be quite tricky if they do get relegated, which is looking very likely, Adam. But could we see a Luton situation here? I know there's a bit more money behind Wolves, but could it actually be a bit of a downward spiral?
the point Jack makes about like the strategy of, you get someone in to bring you back up. Like we've seen that work with some teams. Burnley seem to be the best at doing that. But it's not easy. You look at what Southampton and Leicester have experienced this season. Like they've kept some of their players, but not all of their players. They've actually spent a decent amount of money, certainly Southampton, and they're still sort of really struggling in mid-table. You look at Wrexham and Birmingham, who have spent a hell of a lot of money, and they're currently nowhere near the top. So it's a tough league to kind of take that strategy on. Even Leeds, it took them 2 years to come back up. So, ultimately, and you always feel quite patronising saying this, but I felt a bit like this when Stoke were in the Premier League, that there are teams that are going to there are teams who are in the Premier League who at some point are going to get relegated, even if they've been there for like 10, 11 years. We know that Brentford, maybe in 3 or 4 years, might go down. Bournemouth might go down again. Brighton might even go down again at some point. And it's about kind of making sure your club is sufficiently structured to cope with that aberration of a season that you have. And if I was a Wolves fan, I don't think I would have the confidence that they are, because to me, they already look like a championship team. And then if you take 3 or 4 players out of that who are deemed as viable, maybe the 2 Brazilian guys in midfield and Strand Larsen, there really isn't much else there. So I'd worry about them quite a lot. And also they've kind of had this ownership situation where I've kind of been I mean, everyone's kind of for sale, right? But at the right price. But they've kind of had this sense of being on the market for quite a long time. And you've had that sense of the owner interest becoming less and less intense over time. And I think that's now visible on the field.
Yeah, Jack, is this the worst Premier League team in history? People always look at the Derby County team of the 2007-8 season, just 11 points. This is looking even worse, in fact.
So at the moment, they got, 2 points in 17 games, which I think is... So their points per game at the moment is 0.117, which over the course of a 38 league game season maps out to be 4.47 points. And now I've gone back through the data, and I think that 4.47 points from a 38 league game season is quite bad. It's actually less than half of what Derby County got in 7-8. It's just over a third of what Saints got last season. But look, I don't want to call it too soon. You never know. All it takes is a few wins. They could string a few wins together. They might even push towards double figures by the end of the season. But yeah, it's pretty miserable out there, and like any Wolves fan you speak to will be, incredibly clear-eyed, I think, about what's gone wrong and why. I mean, you could even hear it from. I mean, I only watched the highlights of their game against Brentford at the weekend, but like the booing after the Brentford goals, the booing after Strand Larsen missed his penalty at the end after it was saved by Kelleher. Like, I think everybody knows what a miserable situation they've got themselves into. And like I said, I think they're going to have to take on a lot more pain and get a lot of things right before they can even start to move back in the other direction.
Well, let's move on to the chaotic event at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium as Spurs lost in front of their own fans for the 5th time this season. Well, Jack, despite 2 red cards and yet another home defeat, you took some positives from this game. Is that right?
Sort of, in the sense that my expectations were so low, and actually Tottenham played okay. They nearly got a point, if they got a point against with 9 men against Liverpool, that would be a pretty good result. But because my expectations were so unbelievably low, and they did so much better than my expectations, I'm always having to ask myself afterwards, am I judging this performance relative to my expectations, or am I judging it like by itself? Can this performance stand by itself and be seen in the light of day? And like, look, I'm not going to say they played well, because I don't think they did play well, but they did at least stick together and compete and fight till the end and try and find a way through. And there's been quite a few games this season where they haven't done that, and they haven't really made an impression on the game at all. So yeah, it's that's the problem though when you're playing that badly, that consistently, is that you kind of warp everyone's sense of what a good performance actually is.
I don't know whether it was an optical illusion, but when they did go down to 10 men, I thought they played more on the front foot, Jack. Is that weird to say?
Immediately after the goal, after the first Liverpool goal, Tottenham were just defending in their own penalty area. And the game kind of like slowly became this like walking football, Tottenham defending their own box, Liverpool passing it sideways. It genuinely felt like you were watching like the last extra time in a tournament last 16 game between two sides who were both trying to get penalties. I felt like I was at Denmark 0, Switzerland 0 from a Euros. But then only after in like the last 20 minutes, Spurs actually thought, I can't be bothered with this anymore. Let's just get the ball forward. And at the time, and when they started doing that, and Spence would just be like running down one wing with the ball, and they'd be like getting it into the box to Richarlison. At that point, the football actually did become quite good. It became quite, well, not like good in a sort of quality sense, but like good in a sense that like you could tell that something was happening and it was sort of exciting and the ball was flying around. So yeah, and like it wasn't pretty, it wasn't high quality, but by the end there was at least a bit of action going on.
And what was going on with Xavi Simons' red card? Legitimate after looking back at it now?
I think it's a slow-mo red card. It's a VAR red card. I think once that gets VAR'd, the image of Simons's raised studs going onto Van Dijk's like ankle, Achilles, it's always going to be a red card. I don't think that's a real-time red card. I don't think anybody in the stadium when it happened thought it was a red card. You know, the referee didn't think it was a red. I think that the slow-mo makes it look like a stamp. It wasn't a stamp, I don't think. So I don't think that Simons can have any complaints really, because we live in a VAR world, but at the same time I think it's a bit harsh because I'm really against VAR, and I think that this is one of those moments which proves that VAR has effectively changed the laws of the game, right? Because the laws of the game were not written to withstand the kind of technological scrutiny that they now have, which is that it's changed what constitutes serious foul play, it's changed what constitutes a handball, it's changed what offside is too, and we just had to accept that this is just what football is now.
Well, Adam, we have to talk about Alexander Isak, who went off with what looked like a really horrible injury. David Ornstein's actually reported that it's a potential broken leg. Nick Miller on the briefing asks, is Isak the most cursed record signing ever? It's been a stumbling start to say the least, and this just compounds that. It makes it a little bit more worse now for him.
Of course, you sort of wish him well. I mean, the only thing I'd say on that with regards to is he the most cursed record signing? I mean, look, this injury is it looks like an impact injury from the challenge and from the motion. But this is a player who's had injuries. Isak picking up a series of niggles, I don't think will have been that surprising to Newcastle fans based on his record over the last few years. But clearly this is a horrible one because he's just started to score a couple of goals and you just start to think maybe, his position can start to make sense. Equally, I still didn't think he looked kind of that comfortable in a Liverpool shirt, even in the last couple of games where he's been scoring goals. The only thing I would say is from a Liverpool perspective, and of course you don't want your record signing with a broken leg and out, but it may make things slightly easier for Arne Slot in the second half of the season, in the sense of, Ekitike is going to play. He's your main striker. Salah comes back in. It just sort of kind of gives that kind of less of a sense of some very big names competing for places and more of a sense of these are our stars, they're going to play, that's it. And I just wonder from a man management perspective whether Arne Slot's job just becomes a little bit simpler, that it gives Liverpool that bit of consistency, but obviously horrible at the same time for the individual involved. All I would say on Liverpool was, I thought like their last 20 minutes against 10 men and then against 9 men, like they've had some shocking periods of games this season. I couldn't believe how bad they were. I don't know whether like Tottenham lulled them into this sense of just complete comfort and security, but they just couldn't keep the ball. It was incredible. And with 9 men, they were basically hanging on.
Well, before we go, let's talk about this. We spoke about Morgan Rogers earlier, staking his claim for England. Dominic Calvert Lewin has scored 6 in 5 games for Leeds, Jack. He's putting up some serious numbers here. Is he in for a shout for the World Cup?
Well, I actually think he might be, on the basis that what England don't have, like England have got lots. I think England have got lots of different types of good attacking players. You know, we spoke earlier about how many tens they've got. They've got really good tens. They've got really good wingers. They've got Harry Kane. But what they don't have is an alternative, like old-fashioned number 9. Somebody who can hit, like, let's say Kane gets injured or whatever in the World, or suspended in the World Cup, and they just want like an old-fashioned 9 who they can go long to, who can win headers, who the kind of quicker, smaller players can play off a bit. And I don't think that, like, and there is not really such a player. Like, you know, Tony's obviously played a little bit for England the last few years, but it's not really in the picture at the moment. Dominic Solanke has, but he hasn't started a game all season. He's had an ankle injury. Danny Welbeck has done fantastically well this year, but, you know, maybe like he hasn't played for England for a very, very long time. And it just might be that it's like Calvert Lewin, I'd say, if he continues this current form, he might be part of that conversation along with Tony, Welbeck, Solanke and so on. And I think he's done really, really well. Like, it's obvious that he was so good at Everton, wasn't he, for about a year or two, and then, you know, injuries got on top of him a bit. He stopped scoring goals, but he's really elevated Leeds in the last few months in a way that I wasn't expecting, and I'm sure that Thomas Tuchel and his team will have taken note.
Okay, and it is his turnaround in form that has also helped Leeds turn around their form. Adam, many of us had them to go down this season. 4-1 win over Crystal Palace. Is it too early to give praise to Daniel Farke?
No. He's changed the system. They've had an immediate response. I watch quite a lot of Leeds because my dad's a Leeds fan, and I kind of end up therefore always sort of keeping a bit of an eye on their games. And my sense of them in the first maybe 10, 15 games of the season had been they've recruited really well from a defence and midfield position. Goalkeeper, I'm still not completely sold on, Perry, but the defence and midfield, they're a good, solid, hard team. Good around set pieces, pretty honest, they work hard. I just worried that they'd left themselves short from a creative attacking perspective. You know, the wingers that they'd come up with were kind of the wingers that they'd gone down with. They'd even lost a couple. They'd lost Manus Solomon. Jack Harrison, who come back from Everton, not really doing anything. Even like Dan James, who was their best player in the Championship, has barely played this season. Nonto's not played that much. And Farke kind of loves playing Brendan Aronson, which is kind of always kind of a divisive player amongst Leeds fans as well. But this change of system, I think, works really well because it allows them to have more support closer to Calvert Lewin. I still think, I think at some point West Ham will put a little bit of a run together of 4 to 6 games, given some of the players that they have and the coach that they have. And I think Leeds will need to buy in January, maybe just one or two players of kind of real Premier League quality in that kind of, whether it's a number 10 or a wide player, someone else that can get goals. Because even on Saturday, and they were really good on Saturday, all 4 goals were set pieces. So you're not going to do that every game, and you do need different ways to score goals. But, the little run that they've been on, beat Chelsea, beat Crystal Palace, drawn against Brentford away and probably should have won that game, and drawn against Liverpool. I mean, that's an amazing points return from those 4 games that most teams won't get. So they've given themselves a real shot. I just think they need in January to add that little bit up front still. And also, sorry, the other thing with Calvert Lewin is, as good as he's being, that he might get a niggle at some point. That's what his injury record sadly says. So you have to prepare for that.
All right, gents, let's leave it there. Adam, Jack, really appreciate your time. Make sure you check out our review of the season so far, dropping on your podcast feed on Wednesday. We'll catch you then. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.